"Excuse me, young man. You can't sit here." The words sliced through the soft hum of the first-class cabin like a blade. Heads turned, eyes flicked, whispers stirred. A boy, no older than 10, sat stiff in the wide leather seat, his small hands gripping the armrest, as if it were the only thing holding him steady in this world of polished shoes and pressed suits. The flight attendant loomed over him, her polished smile replaced by a cold sternness. "This section isn't for you. Come on. Let's move you back where you belong." For a heartbeat, silence. The boy's wide eyes searched the cabin, desperate, scanning the unfamiliar faces of men with laptops, women with pearls, and strangers who glanced at him, but quickly looked away. I'm supposed to be here." His voice cracked, barely audible over the soft clink of a champagne glass 2 rows away. The attendant's lips tightened. "Sweetheart, don't make this difficult. This seat is meant for paying passengers. Let's go." The boy swallowed hard, his chest rising and falling too quickly. His fingers trembled as he clutched a small backpack pressed against him. Inside, a toy car peeked out. His comfort in a world that now felt hostile. But the weight of her words was too heavy, too sharp, too cruel. And then it happened. His eyes blurred with tears, his breath caught in his throat. The dam inside him broke, and the boy began to weep. Quiet at first, then louder, until the whole cabin could hear the fragile sound of a child's heartbreak. Passengers shifted uncomfortably. Some stared openly, others pretended not to notice. A man in a suit muttered under his breath. A woman clutched her handbag tighter. And still, the flight attendant stood tall, her arms crossed, tapping her foot in impatience, as if his tears were nothing more than an inconvenience. "Please," the boy whispered through sobs. I can sit here. My papa said—" But his words trailed off, lost in the tide of humiliation crashing over him. The cabin's luxury now felt like a cage. Every passing second dragged his dignity lower. Every eye on him pressed the shame deeper. He shrank into the seat, wishing he could disappear, wishing the leather could swallow him whole. And yet, within his trembling hands, he held something more powerful than the attendant could ever imagine. His phone. His one connection to the man he trusted above all else. But not yet. Not yet. The weight of that decision, the call to Papa, was still to come. For now, there was only the sting of rejection. The cruel divide between first class and you don't belong. The boy's tears rolled down his cheeks, dripping onto the fabric of his sleeve. His sobs echoed faintly against the hushed luxury of the cabin. Every sound of his heartbreak carved itself into the air, impossible to ignore, no matter how badly the passengers wished it away. And so, as the flight climbed higher into the skies, the boy sank lower into despair. But little did anyone know, the higher they flew, the closer they were to a storm that would bring this flight back down to earth in ways no one could have foreseen. The first-class cabin had witnessed his humiliation. The next chapter would witness his courage. And it all began with one trembling hand reaching for his phone. Why is he crying? The words weren't loud, but in the silence of the first-class cabin, they cut through like a sharp blade. A passenger in the second row leaned toward his companion, his voice coated with curiosity and judgment. Others stole glances, quick, darting looks they thought went unnoticed. But the boy felt them all. Every stare burned against his skin, every whisper carved deeper into the hollow of his chest. He clutched his small backpack tighter, pressing it to his body as if it were a shield. His fat fingers dug into the fabric, knuckles white, while his breath trembled in shallow bursts. Inside, that little toy car sat still, silent, powerless, just like him in this moment. The flight attendant's voice still echoed in his head. "You don't belong here." The words refused to fade, bouncing again and again until they filled every corner of his mind. A man in a tailored suit shook his head, muttering, "This is why they need stricter boarding checks." His voice wasn't meant for the boy, but the boy heard it all the same. A woman across the aisle pressed her lips tight, clearly disapproving, but said nothing. Another passenger pulled out headphones, pretending to block out the scene entirely. Most just shifted uncomfortably, trapped between sympathy and silence, unwilling to challenge what they had just witnessed. The boy lowered his gaze to the floor, unable to meet their eyes. The carpet blurred through his tears. He wished he could disappear, wished he could melt away into the space beneath the seat. But no matter how small he tried to make himself, the shame clung to him like a heavy coat he couldn't take off. "Shouldn't someone say something?" whispered a younger woman near the back of the cabin. "Shh," her companion warned, glancing at the attendant. "Don't get involved." And that was the cruelest part. The silence. Dozens of adults sat in comfort, sipping champagne, reading newspapers, scrolling through glowing screens. Yet not one dared to stand, not one dared to step forward for a child in tears. His shoulders shook as he drew the backpack tighter, burying his face into it. The scent of worn fabric, faint crayons, and his father's cologne on the zipper was the only comfort he had left. He felt invisible, and at the same time, he felt exposed to everyone. The flight hummed on, the engines roaring outside, while inside the cabin, his small world seemed to shrink smaller with each passing moment. His heart pounded so hard it hurt. But then, amid the whispers, amid the stares, he remembered something. His father's words. Strong stay. Adi, unwavering. "If anyone ever treats you unfairly, you call me. Always." The boy sniffled, wiping his eyes on the sleeve of his shirt. The phone in his pocket felt heavy, almost glowing, like the last spark of hope. He hadn't reached for it yet. But he knew deep down that the silence of the passengers wouldn't save him. The whispers wouldn't defend him. The stares wouldn't protect him. Only one voice could. His father's. And with trembling hands he began to slide his backpack open, reaching for the only connection that could turn this nightmare around. Because the cabin might have been filled with silence, but the next sound was about to change everything. The boy's hands shook as he slipped the zipper down, the faint rasp of metal sounding louder than the roaring engines outside. He reached inside his backpack, fingers fumbling until they closed around the cool, familiar weight of his phone. His heart pounded. His breaths came shallow. But somewhere inside him, past the fear and the shame, a spark of courage flickered. He pulled the phone out with trembling hands, pressing it against his chest for a moment, before swiping the screen with a tear-streaked thumb. The attendant's sharp voice lingered in his ears. The passenger's whispers still pricked at his skin, but none of that mattered now. He had one person he could call, one voice that could make the world feel safe again. He pressed Papa. The phone rang once, twice. And then, "Hello, my boy," came the deep, steady voice on the other end, calm, strong, unshaken. The boy broke. "Papa." His words tumbled out between sobs. She told me to leave. She said I don't belong here. Everyone's staring. They're whispering. His father's tone sharpened, but not at his son. "Calm yourself, son. Breathe. Tell me exactly what happened." The boy tried, his words fractured and broken by tears. "I'm in first?" "Class, like you said. But the lady, she said I have to get out. She doesn't believe I belong here. She made me cry in front of everyone." For a long moment, silence hummed across the line. Not the silence of neglect, but the silence of controlled fury. Then his father spoke, slowly, firmly. each word carrying a weight that could not be ignored. "Listen to me, my son. You do belong there. No one, no matter who they are, has the right to treat you this way." The boy sniffled, clinging to his father's voice like a lifeline. "But Papa, everyone is just watching. Nobody's helping." "Then they are cowards," his father replied, voice steady, almost regal. "But you are not. You did the right thing calling me." The boy's tears slowed. His chest still ached, but for the first time since the ordeal began, he felt a sliver of strength creep back into his small frame. On the other end, his father's voice dropped lower, more deliberate. "Stay in your seat. Do not move, do not cry anymore. I will handle this." "But what will you do?" the boy whispered. "You will see," came the calm reply. "For now, just sit. I am with you." The boy wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, trying to breathe deeper, just as his father had told him. Around him the cabin still buzzed with uneasy whispers. Some passengers frowned, some looked away. The attendant hovered near the aisle, arms folded, clearly irritated at his stubbornness. But the boy wasn't trembling anymore, not like before. His father's words had steadied him. He sat a little taller, though his backpack was still clutched close to his chest. The phone pressed warm against his ear, and his father's voice wrapped around him like a shield. "Remember this, son. You are my child. And no one will ever make you feel small. Not while I live." A tear slipped down the boy's cheek, but this one wasn't born of shame. It was born of something else. Relief. In that moment the cabin had not changed. The whispers still lingered. The stares still cut. But inside, the boy felt different, stronger. What no one in that seat, Arbin knew, what not even the flight attendant knew, was that his father's calm tone was only the surface. Beneath it burned a storm, and that storm was already moving into action. As the boy sat in silence, gripping his phone, he had no idea just how far his father's power reached. No idea what was about to happen above the clouds. Because the call wasn't just heard, it was answered. And the next voice to echo through that cabin would shake everyone to their core. The boy sat frozen in his seat, the phone still pressed to his ear. His father's final words echoed like thunder. "Stay where you are. I will handle this." And then the line went quiet. But on the other end, miles away from the soaring aircraft, a man was already in motion. A man not just of wealth, but of influence. A father whose voice carried weight in boardrooms, governments, and yes, even the skies themselves. He made one call, then another. Numbers saved for emergencies, voices that snapped to attention the moment they recognized his tone. His message was simple, his demand undeniable. "My son has been humiliated on your flight. This ends now." Within minutes, the control tower received an urgent transmission. A directive passed from desk to desk, growing heavier with each hand it touched. Finally, it reached the cockpit. The captain glanced at the co-pilot, brows furrowed. We've been ordered to divert," he murmured, disbelief in his voice. "Immediate compliance. No questions." The co-pilot blinked. "Mid-flight? But why?" The captain's hands tightened on the controls. "Because this comes from the very top." Back in the cabin, nothing had changed. Yet. The passengers still shifted in their seats, whispering about the crying child in first class. The flight attendant still stood nearby, irritation simmering in her eyes. But then, small signs, subtle changes. The intercom crackled to life, only to fall silent again. A flight attendant rushed past, face pale, whispering something to her colleague. From the cockpit door, A quiet urgency radiated into the cabin. Passengers noticed. "What's going on?" a man asked aloud, pulling out his earbuds. "Did you feel that?" another muttered, sensing the plane's subtle change in direction. The boy sat clutching his backpack, unaware of the storm his father had unleashed. His sobs had softened, his body trembling less now, but inside him, questions still burned. What is Papa doing? What will happen next? The lead flight attendant returned, her posture stiff, her confidence cracked. She avoided the boy's eyes now. She avoided everyone's. Something about her demeanor was different, like a person suddenly realizing the ground beneath her was shifting. The whispers grew louder among the passengers. "Are we landing early? Is there a problem with the plane?" No, this feels different. This feels unusual." The boy sensed it too, a tension in the air, a ripple moving through the cabin like an invisible current. He held tighter to his backpack, his ears straining for any clue. And then, the announcement. The captain's voice boomed through the speakers, steady but heavy. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to unforeseen instructions, we are required to divert this flight. Please remain seated and calm. We will be landing shortly." The cabin erupted in confusion, gasps, murmurs, questions spilling over each other. Passengers craned their necks, searching for answers. And in the middle of it all, the boy sat silent. His tears had dried. His fear was still there, yes. But now something else stirred inside him, a dawning realization. This wasn't just about humiliation anymore. This was about power. His father's power, the kind that could bend even the skies to his will. The attendants scrambled, the passengers speculated, but the boy, he simply waited. Because he knew. Whatever came next, it was for him. And soon the entire plane would understand that too. "Attention, ladies and gentlemen, divert." Captain's voice rolled through the speakers, steady but carrying a weight that made the entire cabin stiffen. Conversations halted, screens dimmed, glasses of wine and champagne froze mid-air. Every eye turned upward, waiting. "We have received instructions to divert this aircraft. We will be making an emergency landing at the nearest international airport. I ask that you remain calm and follow crew instructions." The announcement hit like lightning. A wave of gasps, murmurs, and frantic whispers swept through the cabin. Passengers looked at one another with wide eyes, searching for answers that no one could give. "Emergency landing." A woman clutched her husband's arm. "Is something wrong with the plane?" "Why are we diverting?" Another man asked aloud, voice tinged with fear. But there was no technical malfunction, no fire, no turbulence. The emergency was not in the engines. It was in the heart of the first-class cabin. The boy sat still, his small hands gripping his backpack. His tears had dried, but confusion now clouded his young face. The words emergency landing echoed in his mind, colliding with his father's firm promise. "Stay in your seat. I will handle this." And then, eyes began to turn toward him. Slowly, cautiously. Whispers grew sharper, clearer. "Wait, is this because of that kid?" "It can't be, can it? Why else would we land so suddenly?" The flight attendant, the very one who had barked at him, who had humiliated him, was no longer composed. Her confidence drained. Her hands fidgeted nervously with the edges of her uniform. She moved quickly, whispering to another attendant, her voice low but strained. "This doesn't make sense," she muttered, though her eyes betrayed fear. "Why would command order us down like this?" Her colleague's face turned pale. "Unless someone important is involved?" The first attendant's gaze snapped back toward the boy, and for the first time it was not laced with disdain. It was laced with dread. She began pacing down the aisle, her movements sharp, her mind racing. She could feel it, the walls of her authority crumbling around her. Meanwhile, the cabin vibrated with unease. A businessman slammed his laptop shut, muttering curses under his breath. A mother hugged her child closer, rocking gently as if preparing for a crash. The hum of the engines outside suddenly felt louder, heavier, more ominous than before. And through it all, the boy remained silent, small, unmoving, almost invisible, yet somehow the center of everything. The captain's voice returned, firmer now. "Cabin crew, prepare for landing." The passengers exchanged nervous looks. This was real. The descent was beginning. They could feel it, the subtle tilt of the plane's nose, the shift of gravity pressing them gently into their seats. "Why are we landing?" someone demanded. "We need to know what's happening." But no explanation came. The truth was too heavy, too strange to announce over the intercom. The boy clutched his phone tightly in his lap. He remembered his father's voice, calm, unyielding. "Do not move. Do not cry. I am with you." And though fear still lingered in his chest, there was also something new. A quiet certainty that his father was pulling the strings, that this was no accident. Across the aisle, the flight attendant finally sat down, her face pale, hands trembling. For the first time in her career, she realized she was not in control. She had mocked a child, dismissed his worth, and now the sky itself was shifting against her. The engines roared louder as the plane dipped lower, slicing through clouds. The passengers braced themselves, hearts pounding, eyes darting, every mind buzzing with questions. And yet, none of them knew the truth. None of them knew who the boy's father was, or the storm waiting on the ground. As the wheels prepared to meet the runway, the cabin sat in silence, an uneasy silence thick with fear, guilt, and anticipation. The boy closed his eyes, holding on to his father's last words like a shield. And as the plane descended through the clouds, one truth became clear. This was no ordinary landing. It was justice, descending from the sky. The tires screeched against the runway, jolting the cabin as the aircraft touched down with a force that sent hearts racing. Passengers clutched their armrests, breaths caught in their throats. The engines roared, brakes grinding, as the massive jet slowed on the tarmac far earlier than anyone expected. Through the oval windows, the scene outside was unlike anything a normal landing would reveal. A line of black vehicles stood waiting at the edge of the runway. Police cruisers, airport officials, uniformed personnel who moved with urgency, their silhouettes stark against the glare of floodlights. Inside the cabin, the silence was deafening. No one dared speak above a whisper. Confusion still hung thick in the air, but now it was laced with something sharper: anticipation. The boy sat quietly, small hands resting on his backpack. His eyes were red from tears, but they no longer overflowed. Instead, there was a strange stillness about him, as though he sensed what was unfolding, as though he knew the promise his father made was already beginning to take shape. A passenger muttered nervously, "What's happening? Why are there police out there?" Another leaned across the aisle. "This isn't normal. Something big is going on." All eyes drifted, slowly, cautiously, back to the boy. It was unspoken, but they all felt it. Somehow, impossibly, he was at the center of this storm. The lead flight attendant moved stiffly down the aisle, her composure unraveling with every step. Her lips pressed tight, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted her uniform. She knew. Deep down she knew this was no ordinary diversion. This was retribution coming to her doorstep. The captain's voice broke through the intercom, low and steady. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. We will be escorted to a private terminal. Do not leave your seats until instructed." Gasps rippled through the cabin. A private terminal? Escorted? This was no routine landing. The boy hugged his backpack closer, his little frame dwarfed by the wide leather seat. His mind replayed his father's words. "Stay in your seat. I will handle this." And now, as the plane rolled toward the waiting vehicles, he believed it more than ever. The attendants exchanged anxious looks, whispers darting between them. The one who had spoken so harshly to the boy earlier now avoided looking his way entirely. Her confidence shattered. Every second felt heavier than the last, as though judgment itself were closing in. The engines finally quieted. The plane came to a complete stop. The cabin lights dimmed, then brightened again, illuminating rows of uneasy faces. The passengers held their breath, waiting for something, anything, that would explain the gravity of what they were witnessing. And then, through the windows, figures began to approach, uniforms glinting in the floodlights, authority radiating from their every step. Officials gathered at the foot of the jet bridge, waiting for the door to open. The boy's heart thudded, but it was no longer fear. It was the strange weight of being seen, being defended. For once, the shame of the earlier humiliation began to dissolve, replaced by the knowledge that justice was near. The attendant's knees nearly buckled as the aircraft door clicked open with a metallic hiss. The sound reverberated through the cabin like a final warning. Passengers leaned forward, eyes wide, every soul braced for the unknown. The boy kept his head low, but in the corner of his lips, the faintest spark of relief began to show. His father's storm was here. And as the footsteps echoed closer, one truth became impossible to deny. The flight had landed not because of an emergency, but because power had answered a child's tears. The cabin door hissed open. Anne, and the first glimpse of power, stepped through. Tall, imposing, dressed in a tailored suit that whispered authority with every crease. His stride was steady, unhurried, yet heavy with intent. This was no ordinary passenger's father. This was a man whose presence alone could silence a room before he spoke a word. The passengers froze. Some craned their necks for a better look. Others sank back into their seats, suddenly aware they were witnessing something rare. Even the attendants stiffened, their nervous smiles faltering as his gaze swept the aisle. And then, his eyes found his son. The boy sat in the wide leather seat, clutching his backpack like a lifeline. His tears had dried, but the stain of humiliation still lingered in his expression. When he saw his father, his small body jolted, and the backpack slipped from his grip. "Papa!" His voice cracked as he scrambled up, running down the short aisle. The man's expression softened. He bent low, arms opening wide, and the boy collapsed into them, burying his face into his father's chest. For a long moment, nothing else mattered. The powerful man, the frightened child, father and son locked in an embrace that said more than words ever could. The cabin watched in silence. The contrast was stark. The innocence of a child against the force of a man who carried the weight of respect, wealth, and influence. Slowly, the father straightened, one hand still resting protectively on his son's shoulder. His gaze shifted, sharp and unwavering, to the airline staff who stood frozen by the galley. "Who?" His voice cut through the air like a blade. "Humiliated my son?" No one answered at first. The attendants exchanged quick, frightened glances. The lead attendant swallowed hard, her earlier confidence evaporated, her knees almost trembling beneath her. "It was me," she finally stammered, her voice barely audible. The affair. Their eyes locked onto her, and for a moment she seemed to shrink under the weight of his stare. He took one slow step toward her, the sound of his shoes against the cabin floor echoing like a gavel striking. "You looked at a child," he said, his tone measured but laced with steel. and decided he did not belong. You shamed him. You reduced him to tears in front of strangers. And for what? Because you thought his skin, or his size, or his presence was unworthy of this seat. The attendant's face paled. She opened her mouth, but no words came. The other attendants stood silent, their eyes lowered, unwilling to intervene. The passengers sat riveted. Some shifted uncomfortably, realizing their own silence had made them complicit. Others leaned forward, eyes wide, unwilling to miss a single word. "My son," the father continued, voice rising, "belongs wherever I place him, and no one has the right to tell him otherwise." The boy peeked up at his father, still clinging to his suit. His father's hand squeezed his shoulder gently, reassurance wrapped in strength. Turning back to the attendant, the man's words grew colder. "Your uniform may give you authority in this cabin, but authority without respect is nothing more than arrogance, and arrogance has consequences." The attendant's lips trembled. "Sir, I didn't mean—" "Didn't mean?" He cut her off sharply. "A child's tears are not an accident. They are the result of choices. Your choices. Remember that." Silence thickened the air. No one dared move. No one dared breathe too loudly. The father let the words linger before he finally turned to the captain, who had stepped from the cockpit, hat in hand. The captain's voice was hushed, almost deferential. "Sir, we have complied with the orders. The terminal is ready. Officials are waiting." The father gave a single nod. "Good." His hand never left his son's shoulder. For the passengers, it was a moment of revelation. The diversion, the landing, the waiting. And officials. It all made sense now. This man had the kind of influence that could ground planes mid-air, the kind of power that could turn whispers into silence. But for the boy, it was something simpler. It was proof that his father would always stand between him and the cruelty of the world, that no humiliation was greater than the protection of a father's love. The father bent low, speaking only to his son now, his voice softer. "You are safe, my boy. And you will never forget today. Not because of what was done to you, but because of what we will do in response." The boy nodded, his small hand clutching his father's larger one. For the first time since the ordeal began, his lips curved into the faintest smile. The father straightened once more, his presence filling the cabin, and looked around at the silent rows of passengers. "Let this be a lesson," he said firmly, "that dignity is not for sale, and that the worth of a child cannot be questioned by anyone." The words struck deep, not just into the attendant's conscience, but into the hearts of every silent witness who had chosen not to intervene. And as he prepared to lead his son down the aisle, toward the waiting officials, one thing was certain. This was not the end. It was only the beginning of accountability. The terminal doors slid open, and the chill of authority filled the air. Black cars lined the tarmac, their doors swinging wide as suited executives rushed forward, ties flapping, faces pale. They weren't here by chance. They had been summoned, and they knew exactly why. The father stepped down the stairs of the aircraft. His son's hand nestled firmly in his. The boy, still shaken, pressed close, feeling the strength of his father's stride anchor him. Around them, cameras clicked. Security officers stood at attention, and the airline's highest-ranking officials scrambled to arrange themselves like peers before a king. "Sir, please allow us to apologize," one executive blurted, his voice quivering as he extended a trembling hand. "This should never have happened." The father's gaze was cold, unreadable. He did not take the hand. He did not slow his stride. His silence alone was heavier than their words. Another official stepped forward, stammering, We value every passenger. This was a misunderstanding." At that, the father stopped. Slowly he turned to face them, his son still tucked close beneath his arm. His voice cut through the night air, deep and resonant. "A misunderstanding," he repeated, each syllable deliberate. "A child humiliated, reduced to tears, stripped of dignity in front of dozens of silent witnesses, and you call that a misunderstanding?" The executives faltered, eyes darting to one another, searching for answers that would not come. The boy looked up at his father, awe glimmering behind the lingering hurt. The same man who had told him to sit still now stood unshaken, holding an empire accountable. Behind them, the flight attendant was escorted down the stairs, her earlier arrogance nowhere to be found. Her face was pale, her steps unsteady. Every flash of a camera seemed to pierce her deeper, every whispered murmur from the gathered crowd a reminder that her downfall had begun. "I didn't mean," she stammered, tears streaking her cheeks now. I was only doing my job." The father's gaze snapped to her. "Your job is to protect passengers, to serve with respect, to ensure that every human being on that aircraft feels safe. And you failed, not only as a professional, but as a person." The attendant broke. Her sobs echoed into the silence, her composure shattered beyond repair. For the first time, the humiliation she had inflicted was mirrored back onto her. The father's voice softened, but the steel within it remained. "This is not only about my son. This is about every child who has ever been told they don't belong, every passenger dismissed because of the color of their skin or the assumptions of another." He swept his gaze across the trembling executives. "You will answer for this, not just with apologies, but with change." The executives nodded frantically, promising investigations, retraining, reforms. Words spilled out like a flood, desperate attempts to contain the damage. But none of it softened the truth. The boy tugged gently at his father's sleeve. "Papa, can we go now?" His small voice broke the tension, reminding everyone that beneath the storm was still a child who just wanted to leave. The father looked down, his stern face softening as he knelt. "Yes, my boy. But remember this moment. Remember that your tears moved mountains, because you are worth defending." The boy nodded, his arms wrapping tight around his father's neck. Behind them, the flight attendant slumped against a railing, her career crumbling in real time. The executives whispered urgently, already planning damage control, and the passengers who had once watched in silence now carried the weight of shame for having done nothing. The father stood tall once more, leading his son toward the waiting cars. His words lingered in the air, unshakable and final. "This is not the end. Justice does not stop with one flight. It begins here." And with that, the doors closed behind them. But outside, the world was already waiting to hear the story. It began with a single post. A passenger, still shaken from the surreal landing, uploaded a grainy video to social media. A boy in first class, tears streaking down his face. And the moment his father arrived, towering like justice itself. Within minutes, the clip spread. By the hour, it was everywhere. News outlets picked it up, influencers reposted it, and millions of strangers watched in disbelief as the story unfolded frame by frame. "This is unacceptable," one commentator's voice thundered on a broadcast. "No child should be treated this way in 2025. "This father," another declared, "showed the world what it means to stand up, not just for his son, but for dignity itself." The internet caught fire. Hashtags flooded timelines. Outrage poured in from every corner of the globe. Some shared their own stories of humiliation at airports and hotels. Others praised the father, calling him a hero. Memes, editorials, late-night debates. Suddenly, the boy's tears were no longer private. They were public, symbolic, unforgettable. In one clip, the flight attendant's pale, trembling face circled the internet with captions like, "The look when arrogance meets accountability." Her name, her career, everything she once stood for, now dissected by millions of strangers. But in the middle of the storm, something unexpected happened. The narrative began to shift. Because the boy, once humiliated, was now being celebrated. His small figure in that oversized seat became an emblem, an image of resilience. Articles called him the boy who changed the flight. Commentators said, his tears landed a plane. And activists across the world declared, he reminded us that silence in the face of injustice is complicity. Meanwhile, his father's calm authority inspired awe. Some questioned how one man could command such influence. Others simply admired the courage it took to use power not for wealth, but for protection. Fathers like him, one journalist wrote, remind us that true strength is not shown in how you fight for yourself, but in how you defend your child. The boy watched some of it unfold on a screen later, sitting beside his father in a quiet room. His face was still uncertain, still carrying the shadows of what had happened. "Papa," he whispered, "why is everyone talking about me?" His father placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "Because your tears showed the world a truth it had forgotten. That dignity is not a privilege. It is a right." The boy lowered his gaze, cheeks warm, unsure if he wanted to be a symbol. Yet inside, a flicker of pride stirred. For the first time, the memory of that humiliatio no longer crushed him. It carried meaning. Around the world, debates raged. Some dismissed the event as an overreaction. Others argued it exposed a deeper sickness that had lingered in silence too long. But regardless of opinion, one fact was undeniable. Everyone was talking. Everyone had seen, and everyone had been forced to choose where they stood. The boy's story was no longer just his. It belonged to millions who had ever felt dismissed, unseen, or told they did not belong. And as the headlines blazed, one question began to surface everywhere. What happens next? The world had watched. But now, the world was waiting. The storm had passed, but its echo lingered. Days after the incident, the headlines began to fade, the viral clips slowed their climb, and the internet's endless appetite shifted to newer stories. But for the boy, for his father, and for every soul who had watched that moment unfold, the memory remained heavy with meaning. The boy sat on the balcony of his home, the world quieter now. He stared at the horizon, the memory of that leather seat in first class still sharp in his mind, the stares, the whispers, the sting of rejection. But alongside that memory was another, the embrace of his father, the strength of his words, and the moment justice touched down on a runway. He turned to his father, seated beside him. "Papa, why did it have to happen to me?" His small voice carried the ache of a child still searching for answers. The father's gaze was steady, his tone calm but firm. Because sometimes life chooses us to carry lessons, painful lessons, but lessons that can change more than just our own story. The boy frowned. "But it hurt so much. Everyone was staring at me." "Yes," his father replied, leaning closer. "And that hurt will remind you, for the rest of your life, of what no one should ever feel again. You were humiliated for nothing, Mose. Rather than being yourself. That is injustice, and injustice must never be ignored." The boy was quiet, thinking. Slowly, he nodded, as if pieces of something bigger were beginning to click into place. Meanwhile, the world outside their home had not forgotten. Schools used his story to teach kindness. Leaders spoke about it in conferences. Families told their children, If you ever feel small, remember the boy who cried in first class and the father who stood for him. And the airline, shaken to its core, launched reforms, pledges, and campaigns. They promised better training, better awareness, and a deeper respect for the dignity of every passenger. Whether genuine or born of fear, change had begun. But for the father, victory was not in press releases or apologies. It was in his son's eyes, the shift from shame to quiet pride. "You see, my boy," he said one evening, "power is not measured in money or influence. True power is measured in how you protect the innocent, how you lift those who are told they don't belong. That is what humanity should mean." The boy leaned against him, the weight of his small body settling into the safety of his father's side. For the first time since that flight, his lips curled into a gentle smile. He had been the child who wept under stares and whispers. But now, he was also the child who reminded the world that dignity is not given. It is inherent. And as night fell, the story no longer belonged to just a boy or his father. It belonged to humanity itself, a reminder carved in the skies, delivered on a runway, and remembered in the heart of anyone who believes in justice. Because sometimes it only takes one child's tears to awaken the conscience of millions, and that lesson would not be forgotten.